The hospital corridor smells like bleach and fear. 6-year-old Amara Jackson watches nurses sprint past her mother's cleaning cart, shouting about a multi-vehicle pileup and a dying patient who needs RH-null blood immediately. Amara knows she has that blood because doctors told her mother it made her special, 1 in 6 million. When the nurses say no donor can arrive in time, Amara tugs her mother's uniform. "Mama, I can help." What she doesn't know is that this single decision will trigger a legal war that exposes the ugliest truths about race, wealth, and who deserves to be saved. Grace Jackson's hands freeze on the mop handle when her daughter speaks those 3 words. The emergency room at Charlotte Memorial Hospital erupts in controlled chaos around them. Doctors barking orders while trauma teams wheel in victims from the highway disaster on Interstate 85. Grace knows exactly what Amara means because they've had this conversation before. Back when the pediatrician discovered her daughter's blood type during a routine checkup and called it a medical marvel. RH-null blood exists in fewer than 50 people worldwide, the doctor had explained, and Amara possessed this golden blood that could save lives when nothing else would work. But Amara is 6 years old, barely 45 pounds, with braids tied in purple ribbons and a smile that still loses teeth. Grace opens her mouth to say no, to pull her baby away from this madness. "But doctor," Sarah Morrison catches the exchange and rushes over with desperation painted across her face. "Did she just say what I think she said?" the doctor asks. Her blue surgical gown splattered with someone else's blood. Grace nods slowly, feeling the weight of an impossible choice crushing her chest. "Doctor." Morrison crouches to Amara's eye level, her voice gentle despite the emergency. "Sweetheart, we have a patient who's going to die without a very special kind of blood. Your kind of blood, but you're very young. And I need you to understand this might hurt a little. Are you absolutely sure you want to help?" Amara doesn't hesitate, her brown eyes wide and certain. "Will the person die if I don't?" she asks. Dr. Morrison glances at Grace, then back at Amara. "Yes, honey, they will." Amara straightens her small shoulders. "Then we have to try, right, Mama?" The ethics committee convenes in 4 minutes flat, hospital administrators appearing from nowhere to debate whether federal regulations allow pediatric blood donation in emergency circumstances. The voices grow heated, medical terminology flying over Amara's head while she holds her mother's calloused hand. Finally, the chief of surgery makes the call, his signature authorizing the procedure with the caveat that they'll use the absolute minimum volume necessary. They rush Amara to a private room where nurses with kind smiles distract her with stories while inserting the IV line. She squeezes her mother's fingers when the needle pricks, tears forming but not falling because she's trying to be brave, like the superheroes in her picture books. The blood flows from her small arm into sterile bags, dark and precious, while Grace whispers prayers under her breath. 20 minutes later, surgical teams race the blood to operating room 3, where Theodore Whitmore lies dying on a table, his chest crushed by the steering column of his Bentley when a semi-truck jackknifed across 4 lanes. Grace doesn't learn the patient's identity until afterward, when security personnel in dark suits flood the pediatric recovery area, and a hospital administrator nervously explains that the man Amara saved owns Whitmore Industries, one of the largest manufacturing conglomerates in the Southeast. Theodore Whitmore's net worth exceeds $8 billion. His face appears on magazine covers and business news segments, and at this exact moment, a 6-year-old black girl's blood is keeping him alive. The realization hits Grace like a physical blow. Fear, replacing the relief she'd felt when Dr. Morrison announced the transfusion worked. People like Theodore Whitmore exist in a different universe than people like her and Amara. And Grace learned long ago that crossing those invisible boundaries brings nothing but trouble. She's preparing to quietly take Amara home, to disappear back into their anonymous life of struggle and survival, when Theodore's daughter arrives, and everything changes. Victoria Whitmore explodes through the hospital entrance with an entourage of assistants and attorneys, her designer heels clicking against linoleum like gunshots. Someone directs her to the surgical waiting area where Grace sits with a drowsy Amara curled in her lap. Victoria's eyes, cold and calculating behind tortoiseshell glasses, sweep over them with barely concealed disgust. She pulls the lead surgeon aside, and Grace overhears fragments of the heated conversation. "That black janitor's child? You let that girl's blood into my father." Victoria's voice drips with revulsion that makes Grace's stomach clench. The surgeon tries to explain the medical necessity, the lack of alternatives, the fact that Amara saved Theodore's life. But Victoria isn't listening. She storms over to Grace, towering in her power suit and fury. "I want this kept absolutely quiet," Victoria hisses, low enough that nearby staff can't hear. "No media, no publicity, nothing. Here." She produces a checkbook, scribbling an amount that makes Grace's breath catch. $50,000. More money than Grace has seen in her entire life. "Take this and disappear. Forget this ever happened. If I hear you've contacted the press or tried to exploit this situation, my lawyers will bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again. Do you understand?" The check trembles in Grace's fingers, and she wants to throw it back in this woman's face, to tell her exactly what she can do with her blood money. But $50,000 means Amara could go to a better school, could have clothes that fit, could eat something besides dollar menu meals and food bank donations. Grace's pride wars with her desperation, while Victoria's cold eyes bore into her, waiting for submission. Before Grace can respond, Amara stirs in her arms and looks up at Victoria with sleepy confusion. "Is that the sick person's family?" she asks innocently. "I'm glad I could help. Mama always says we should be kind to everyone." Victoria's expression flickers with something that might be shame, but it vanishes so quickly Grace wonders if she imagined it. Victoria straightens, smoothing her skirt. "Yes, well, very charitable of you," she says with ice in her voice, then turns and walks away without another word. Grace stares at the check, feeling like she just sold something infinitely more valuable than blood. The secret lasts exactly 18 hours before a night shift nurse with a conscience and a Twitter account changes everything. By the time Grace drops Amara at her underfunded elementary school the next morning, 3 news vans idle outside the chain-link fence, reporters checking their phones and comparing notes. Grace's ancient Honda Civic attracts their attention like sharks scenting blood. Cameras and microphones materializing around her driver's door before she can fully process what's happening. "Miss Jackson, is it true your daughter saved Theodore Whitmore's life?" a blonde reporter shouts, thrusting a microphone through the chaos. "How does it feel knowing a 6-year-old performed such a heroic act?" another voice demands. Amara shrinks in her booster seat, overwhelmed by the attention. And Grace does the only thing she can think of. She lies. "No comment," she mutters, grabbing Amara's hand and rushing toward the school entrance while cameras capture every stumbling step. But the story is already everywhere, trending on social media with hashtags that turn Amara into a symbol rather than a child. 6-year-old hero saves billionaires. Life screams the headline on every news site, accompanied by a photo someone snapped at the hospital showing tiny Amara with a bandage on her arm, looking brave and vulnerable. The narrative writes itself. A heartwarming tale of innocent kindness, transcending class and circumstance. And America devours it with an appetite that terrifies Grace. By noon, the principal calls Grace at work, her voice apologetic but firm. The media presence outside the school is disrupting classes. Parents are complaining, and perhaps Amara should stay home for a few days until things calm down. Grace bites back angry words because she can't afford to lose this cleaning job, not when she already works 2 others just to keep their lights on. She leaves early anyway, sacrificing hours she desperately needs, and picks up a confused Amara who doesn't understand why everyone suddenly cares so much about something that seemed simple and right. Their apartment complex in the economically depressed east side of Charlotte offers no refuge from the storm. Neighbors who barely acknowledged Grace before now watch from windows and doorways, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Mrs. Henderson from upstairs corners Grace in the stairwell, her voice dripping with accusation. "I saw you on TV," she says, arms crossed over her ample chest. "Everyone knows what you're really doing. You set this whole thing up, didn't you? Use that poor baby to get money from that rich white man. It's disgusting." Grace tries to defend herself, to explain that Amara made the choice independently, that Grace didn't even know who the patient was until afterward, but Mrs. Henderson has already decided the truth. Others share her opinion, and by evening, someone has spray-painted "Gold Digger" across Grace's battered car door. Grace scrubs at the paint with tears streaming down her face while Amara watches from the apartment window, too young to read the words but old enough to understand her mother's pain. Theodore Whitmore recovers faster than doctors expected, his survival bordering on miraculous given the severity of his injuries. He wakes fully conscious on the third day post-surgery and immediately asks about the child donor who saved him. His private staff scrambles to compile information, presenting him with a dossier that reveals more about Grace and Amara Jackson than they probably know about themselves. Theodore studies the documents from his hospital bed, learning about Grace's 3 minimum-wage jobs, the father who abandoned them before Amara was born, the eviction notices and disconnection warnings that define their existence. He sees photos of Amara's school, a crumbling building with outdated textbooks and overcrowded classrooms where dreams go to die. Something shifts in Theodore's chest, an unfamiliar emotion he can't quite name, but that feels uncomfortably like shame. Has built an empire, accumulated more wealth than 10 generations could spend, and yet a child living in poverty possessed something he couldn't buy at any price: the selfless courage to save a stranger's life. Theodore makes a decision that will alter multiple futures. Against his doctor's advice and Victoria's strenuous objections, he discharges himself from the hospital 5 days after surgery. His security team coordinates with the school principal for a surprise visit, bringing camera crews from friendly media outlets to control the narrative. Theodore arrives at Amara's elementary school in a convoy of black SUVs that turn heads throughout the neighborhood. He walks slowly, still recovering, into the gymnasium where students have been assembled for a special presentation. Amara sits cross-legged in the front row, wearing a donated coat 2 sizes too big and shoes with holes she tries to hide by curling her toes. When Theodore enters, escorted by the principal and followed by cameras, confused murmurs ripple through the crowd of children. Theodore spots Amara immediately. Recognition easy, because her face has been plastered across every news channel for days. He crosses the gymnasium floor, his movements careful, and lowers himself to one knee in front of her, despite the pain it causes his healing ribs. "Amara Jackson," he says, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "You saved my life, when you didn't have to, when you didn't even know who I was. You're the bravest person I've ever met." He produces a teddy bear from behind his back, ridiculous and oversized, and Amara's face lights up with pure joy. The cameras capture every second, the moment engineered for maximum heartwarming effect, and Theodore hates himself a little for the calculation, even as he recognizes its necessity. The media coverage shifts overnight. Grace and Amara transformed from suspicious opportunists into a heartwarming American success story. But in a mansion across town, Victoria Whitmore watches the news footage with mounting rage, her manicured fingernails digging crescents into her palms as she plans her counterstrike. Theodore becomes a regular presence in their lives with an intensity that both comforts and terrifies Grace. He visits their apartment unannounced, his security detail waiting outside while he sits on their threadbare couch drinking instant coffee and asking Amara about school. He learns that she loves reading but the library has few books, that she wants to be a doctor when she grows up, that she shares her lunch with a classmate whose family has even less. Theodore sees in Amara something he lost decades ago, an unshakable faith in basic human goodness that wealth and cynicism couldn't quite corrupt in him yet. He offers gifts. Grace refuses most of them, her pride a fortress built from years of scraping by without charity. But Theodore is persistent and strategic. He frames his offers as investments rather than handouts, opportunities rather than pity. When he proposes paying for Amara to attend Ashford Academy, Charlotte's most prestigious private school, Grace's immediate instinct is to refuse. But Amara is brilliant, her potential suffocating in an underfunded public school with 35 students per class and teachers too overwhelmed to nurture exceptional minds. Theodore presents enrollment documents, scholarship applications already completed, and testimonials from Ashford's headmaster praising Amara's test scores. "She deserves every advantage," Theodore argues gently, understanding the battle between Grace's pride and love. "This isn't charity. This is justice. She saved my life, Grace. Let me give her a chance at a better one." Grace signs the papers with hands that shake, uncertain whether she's opening a door or walking into a trap. Ashford Academy sits on 27 acres of manicured lawns and historic buildings that look more like a country club than a school. Amara's first day arrives with September sunshine and a new uniform that cost more than Grace's monthly rent. Theodore insists on driving them personally, his Bentley replacement gliding through tree-lined streets where homes sell for millions and poverty exists only as an abstract concept. Other parents dropping off children stare at the odd trio, their expressions ranging from curiosity to poorly disguised disapproval. Amara clutches Grace's hand, her usual confidence shaken by the overwhelming foreignness of everything around her. Grace walks her to the third-grade classroom, hyper-aware of the glances from other parents, the whispers that follow them like toxic fog. She kisses Amara's forehead and leaves before her daughter can see the doubt in her eyes. The problems start immediately, subtle at first but escalating with calculated cruelty. Madison Pemberton, 8 years old and already fluent in passive-aggressive warfare, wrinkles her nose when Amara sits at the communal table during art class. "You're the blood girl, right?" Madison says loudly enough for everyone to hear. "My mom says your mom is using you to get money from Mr. Whitmore." "That's pretty gross." Other children giggle, sensing weakness like predators scenting injury. Amara's face burns with confusion and shame, emotions she doesn't fully understand but that hurt nonetheless. The teacher, Mrs. Blackwell, a severe woman in her 50s who's taught at Ashford for 23 years, overhears, but says nothing, her silence a tacit endorsement of the cruelty. At lunch, Amara sits alone while other students cluster in established groups, their conversations filled with references to ski trips and summer homes in places Amara can't pronounce. When she tries to join a table, a boy named Preston loudly announces that all seats are taken, despite 3 empty chairs. The exclusion is systematic and absolute, a collective decision by children who've learned prejudice from parents who perfected it over generations. The academic treatment proves even more insidious. Teachers call on Amara less frequently than other students, their surprise evident when she provides correct answers to difficult questions. Mrs. Blackwell assigns her to the remedial reading group despite test scores that place her 3 grade levels ahead, explaining with condescending patience that they need to ensure Amara has a proper foundation before advancing. When Amara protests, citing her standardized test results, Mrs. Blackwell's smile turns to ice. "Those tests don't always reflect a student's true capabilities," she says, her meaning crystal clear. Amara isn't like the other children, and no amount of test scores will change that fundamental fact. The bathroom becomes a war zone where supervision doesn't reach. Girls surround Amara one afternoon, Madison leading the charge with practiced cruelty. "Your hair looks like a mop," Madison announces, reaching out to touch one of Amara's braids with exaggerated disgust. "Do you even wash it? It's so nappy and weird." The other girls laugh, and Amara runs from the bathroom with tears streaming down her face, her sense of self crumbling under the assault. She tells no one, absorbing the pain silently because she's starting to believe she deserves it, that maybe she really doesn't belong in this world of whiteness and wealth. Grace notices the changes immediately. Amara grows quiet, withdrawn, her usual enthusiasm replaced by a heaviness that terrifies Grace because she recognizes it in herself. When Grace asks about school, Amara manufactures smiles and vague reassurances, protecting her mother from truths that would break her heart. But Grace knows, has always known, what happens when black children enter spaces designed to exclude them. She calls Theodore, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "This was a mistake," she tells him. "Amara is miserable. Shay's being bullied, isolated, treated like Shay's inferior, despite being smarter than half those privileged brats." Theodore listens, his jaw clenching as Grace describes the daily microaggressions and overt racism his money can't quite shield her from. He promises to intervene, to speak with the headmaster, to ensure Amara receives the respect she deserves. But what Theodore doesn't know, what Grace is only beginning to suspect, is that Victoria has friends on Ashford's board of directors and that the bullying isn't random. It's orchestrated, a deliberate campaign to prove that some people will never belong no matter how special their blood might be. Madison Pemberton's mother, Caroline, lunches with Victoria twice monthly at the country club they both frequent. The connection runs deep, old money recognizing its own, and when Victoria casually mentions during their salmon nicois that shed appreciate any help making life difficult for a certain scholarship student, Caroline understands immediately. Children are easy to manipulate, especially privileged children who've been taught that their comfort matters more than others' dignity. Caroline plants suggestions with Madison over breakfast. Innocent observations about how Amara doesn't quite fit in, how her clothes are wrong, how she smells different, how she probably cheated on those tests because everyone knows those people aren't as smart as they pretend. Madison absorbs the poison and distributes it efficiently, recruiting allies with the casual ease of someone who's never faced consequences for cruelty. By the end of Amara's second month at Ashford Academy, she's learned a brutal lesson about how the world actually works. Kindness matters less than wealth, character less than color, and some barriers remain invisible but absolutely impenetrable. She stops raising her hand in class, stops trying to make friends, stops believing she deserves to be saved. And Victoria, watching from a distance through carefully cultivated sources, smiles because everything is going exactly according to plan. Theodore announces his intention to establish a trust fund for Amara during a live television interview that makes national headlines. $5 million designated specifically for her education and future expenses, a fortune designed to ensure she'll never struggle like her mother has. The interviewer calls it heartwarming, a beautiful story of gratitude and generosity. Theodore presents it as simple justice, though his eyes betray deeper emotions he can't quite articulate. The interview airs on a Tuesday evening, and by Wednesday morning, Victoria has already set her trap in motion. She summons Maxwell Crane, a private investigator whose specialty involves manufacturing evidence for clients wealthy enough to afford his particular services. Maxwell is expensive, discreet, and completely devoid of ethical constraints. Victoria explains her requirements in her penthouse office overlooking Charlotte's financial district, her instructions precise and cold. "I need dirt on Grace Jackson," she says flatly. "Real or fabricated? I don't care. Something criminal. Something that proves she's unfit to parent, that she's been exploiting my father's guilt for financial gain." Maxwell nods, having heard similar requests countless times. "Drug possession is easiest," he suggests. "Small amount of cocaine or methamphetamine. We plant it in her apartment, arrange for police to receive an anonymous tip. Child Protective Services gets involved automatically." Victoria considers this, her fingers drumming against her desk. Make it look organic. No obvious setup, and make sure it happens somewhere public enough that the media covers it. The plan unfolds with mechanical precision over the following 2 weeks. Maxwell's team conducts surveillance, learning Grace's routines and identifying vulnerabilities. They discover she works night shifts at Charlotte Memorial Hospital 3 times weekly, cleaning the same hallways where Amara once donated blood. The irony doesn't escape Maxwell, though he's long past caring about such things. On a Thursday night, while Grace mops the third-floor corridor, Maxwell's associate plants a small bag of methamphetamine in her cleaning cart, tucked beneath spare towels where it won't be immediately visible, but will be easily discovered during a search. At exactly 11:45, hospital security receives an anonymous call reporting suspicious drug activity involving a custodial staff member. They're obligated to investigate, protocol demanding they search Grace's belongings before she leaves the premises. Grace is pulling off her gloves, preparing to clock out after an exhausting 8-hour shift, when 2 security guards approach with apologetic expressions. "Mom, we need to search your cart," the older guard says. "We received a report, and it's just procedure. Want take a minute." Grace's heart drops because she knows how these situations end for people who look like her. But she has nothing to hide. "Go ahead," she says, stepping back with her hands visible. A defensive posture learned from too many encounters with authority. The guards search efficiently, and when they discover the bag of methamphetamine, the younger guard's expression shifts from apologetic to accusatory. "Mom, you need to come with us," he says, his hand moving to his radio. "Don't move." Grace tries to explain, her voice rising in panic. "That's not mine. I've never seen that before. Someone put it there." But the words sound exactly like what a guilty person would say, and the guards have heard them 1,000 times. They call the police, and, within 20 minutes, Grace is in handcuffs while early morning hospital staff watch with a mixture of pity and judgment. The arrest happens in the main lobby, where shift changes guarantee maximum witnesses. Amara, sleeping at home under a neighbor's supervision, doesn't learn about her mother's arrest until morning, when a social worker appears at their apartment door with Charlotte Mecklenburg police officers. The social worker, a tired-looking white woman named Jennifer Hobbs, explains with practiced gentleness that Amara's mother has been arrested on drug possession charges and that Child Protective Services must place Amara in temporary foster care pending investigation. Amara doesn't understand most of the words, but she understands she's being taken from her home, and she screams. The officers stand uncomfortably by while Jennifer tries to calm a hysterical 6-year-old who only wants her mother. Eventually, Jennifer has no choice but to physically carry Amara to the car while neighbors watch and do nothing. The media coverage explodes with vicious enthusiasm, the heartwarming narrative collapsing into something darker and more familiar. Drug arrest raises questions about heroic. Mother reads one headline. Was blood donation story too good to be true? Asks another. Conservative commentators use the arrest as proof that poverty and black single motherhood inevitably lead to criminality. Liberal commentators defend Grace cautiously, noting that charges aren't convictions. But their words carry less weight than the booking photo that circulates endlessly online. Theodore learns about Grace's arrest while reviewing quarterly earnings reports in his home office. His assistant interrupts the meeting with unusual urgency. And when Theodore sees the news coverage, rage unlike anything he's felt in decades floods his system. He calls his personal attorney, Marcus Chen, a brilliant Chinese-American lawyer who's handled Theodore's legal affairs for 20 years. I want you to represent Grace Jackson, Theodore orders. Best defense team money can buy. Get her out of jail today and find out what really happened. Marcus has questions, concerns about optics, and potential conflicts of interest, but Theodore's tone brooks no argument. Within 3 hours, Grace walks out of county lockup on bail posted by Theodore's accounts. But the damage is done. The court has already awarded temporary custody to Child Protective Services, and Grace's parental rights hang in legal limbo pending investigation and trial. Theodore discovers Victoria's involvement through Marcus' preliminary investigation. Security footage from the hospital showing a man in a maintenance uniform who doesn't match any employee records. When confronted, Victoria doesn't even bother denying it. "You're making a mistake, Father," she says coolly during a tense dinner at his estate. "That woman is using you. Using some sob story about her daughter to manipulate your guilt, in protecting you from yourself." Theodore stares at his daughter, seeing her clearly, perhaps for the first time. "You framed an innocent woman," he says quietly. "You traumatized a child. For what? Money you don't need? Control you've never earned?" Victoria's composure cracks slightly. "You were going to give them $5 million while I've worked my entire life building our family legacy. That girl isn't family. She's not even." Victoria catches herself, but the unspoken words hang between them like a confession. Theodore feels something break inside his chest, grief for the daughter he apparently never really knew. "Get out," he says softly. "Get out of my house, and don't come back until you've figured out who you actually are." Victoria leaves, but not before producing documents from her purse. Forged papers bearing Grace's signature on agreements not to seek additional compensation from Theodore. "I have proof she's been planning this from the beginning," Victoria says. "If you keep defending her, it'll destroy her reputation so completely that even your lawyers won't be able to save her. Your choice, Father." Theodore watches his daughter walk away, understanding that the real war is just beginning. The Henderson family seems perfect on paper. Married 15 years, 2 biological children, a spacious home in a middle-class suburb. Child Protective Services places Amara with them on Friday afternoon. Jennifer Hobbs assuring a devastated Grace that the Hendersons have an excellent track record and that this placement is temporary. Grace has no choice but to watch her daughter disappear into someone else's custody. Amara's face pressed against the car window as they drive away. The Henderson home sits in a development of identical houses with identical lawns, the kind of enforced uniformity that makes everything feel slightly unreal. Bill Henderson works in pharmaceutical sales. His wife Sandra stays home with their children, 13-year-old Tyler and 10-year-old Emma. They greet Amara with bright smiles and a bedroom decorated in cheerful yellows, a space clearly prepared to look welcoming for the social worker's inspection. Sandra shows Amara where everything is, her voice overly sweet in a way that makes Amara's skin prickle with unease. The first few days pass in numb confusion. Amara attends school but can't concentrate, her mind constantly returning to her mother in jail, Theodore in his mansion, the life that shattered so completely she can't understand how to piece it back together. The Hendersons treat her with careful politeness in public. But when doors close and observers leave, subtle changes emerge. Sandra's smile becomes thinner, her patience shorter. She corrects Amara's grammar constantly, her tone suggesting she's doing the child a favor by teaching her to speak properly. Bill watches Amara with calculating eyes that make her want to hide. The cultural differences, minor at first, compound into daily microaggressions that chip away at Amara's sense of self. Sandra comments repeatedly on Amara's hair, asking why Grace didn't teach her daughter proper grooming. When Amara explains her hair is natural and her mother braids it weekly, Sandra makes a disgusted sound. "Well, that's going to change," she announces, producing scissors from a kitchen drawer. "We can't have you looking unkempt. People will think we're not taking care of you properly." Amara backs away, panic rising, because her mother always said her hair was beautiful, that the braids connected her to ancestors and culture and identity. "Please don't," Amara begs. "My mama will fix it when I go home." But Sandra is already moving forward, her grip firm on Amara's shoulder. "You're in our home now, and you'll follow our rules," she says. And the scissors make wet snicking sounds as coils fall to the tile floor. Amara cries silently while her hair is butchered into an approximation of Emma Henderson's straight bob, a style completely wrong for her texture that will require chemical straighteners to maintain. Sandra seems pleased with her work, oblivious or indifferent to the trauma she's inflicting. The food presents another battleground. The Hendersons eat bland dinners of overcooked chicken and unseasoned vegetables, meals Amara struggles to finish. When she leaves food on her plate, Sandra accuses her of being ungrateful. "Your mother clearly didn't teach you proper table manners," Sandra says. "We work hard to put food on this table, and you'll eat what you're given, or go hungry." Amara tries to explain she's not used to this kind of food, that her mother cooks different meals, but her words are dismissed as complaints from a spoiled child. By the third night, Amara stops objecting and forces down whatever is served, her stomach churning with unfamiliar flavors. The Henderson children, initially curious about their temporary sibling, quickly absorb their parents' attitudes. Tyler mocks Amara's accent and vocabulary, calling her ghetto when his parents aren't listening. Emma excludes her from activities with pointed cruelty, explaining that Amara wouldn't understand their games or music. When Amara tries to join them watching television, Tyler changes the channel and tells her foster kids don't get to make decisions. School becomes another nightmare now that Amara is attending a different district, separated from the familiar misery of Ashford Academy. Teachers at Brookside Elementary don't know her history as a prodigy or a hero. They see only a black foster child with behavioral concerns and an unconvincing story about being framed. Her new teacher, Mr. Patterson, assumes she's behind academically and assigns her to remedial groups, despite her protests. When Amara solves advanced math problems correctly, he accuses her of cheating rather than acknowledging her intelligence. She learns quickly to hide her abilities, to perform at the lower level expected of her, because excelling only brings suspicion and punishment. The isolation is absolute and suffocating. Amara is forbidden from contacting her mother or Theodore, Jennifer Hobbs, explaining during weekly check-ins that maintaining boundaries helps children adjust to temporary placements. Amara doesn't want to adjust. She wants to go home. She starts wetting the bed at night, a regression that brings shame and fury from Sandra, who makes Amara wash her own sheets in cold water while lecturing about responsibility. The psychological abuse is systematic and deliberate. Sandra frequently reminds Amara that she should be grateful for the Hendersons' kindness, that many foster children have it much worse. "We're doing you a favor," she says repeatedly. "Your mother is a criminal. Your mother doesn't want you. We're the only family you have now." The words burrow into Amara's mind like parasites, breeding doubt and self-hatred. Maybe she is the problem. Maybe she deserves this treatment. Maybe everything beautiful she believed about the world was a lie. Meanwhile, Grace fights her case from the outside, Theodore's lawyers working around the clock to prove the drugs were planted. Marcus Chen's investigators discover security footage, inconsistencies, financial transfers that trace back to shell companies, patterns that suggest organized conspiracy. But the legal system moves with glacial slowness, and every day that passes is another day Amara suffers in state custody. Theodore tries repeatedly to visit Amara, using his wealth and influence to pressure Child Protective Services. But Jennifer Hobbs holds firm. Regulations prohibit non-family visitation during temporary placements, and Theodore's relationship with Amara doesn't fit any recognized category. He threatens lawsuits, but Marcus warns that aggressive legal action might hurt rather than help Grace's case. Theodore has never felt so powerless, his billions useless against bureaucratic machinery designed to protect children, but so often traumatizing them instead. On a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks into placement, Amara overhears a conversation that changes everything. She's supposed to be asleep, but hunger keeps her awake because Sandra sends her to bed without dinner as punishment for talking back. She creeps to the top of the stairs, hoping to sneak to the kitchen, when she hears Bill and Sandra talking in the living room below. "We're getting $2,200 a month for her," Bill says, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Add that to the stipend for taking a special needs placement, and we're clearing almost $3,000 monthly. Not bad for one extra kid." Sandra laughs. "And if they can't reunite her with her mother, we could adopt." The long-term subsidy would pay for Tyler's orthodontics and Emma's summer camp. The agency is already suggesting the mother might not get her rights back. Amara understands with horrible clarity that she isn't a child to the Hendersons. She's income, a financial asset to be maintained and exploited. Her breath catches in her throat, a sob she barely manages to swallow. She retreats to the unfamiliar bedroom and cries into a pillow that smells like fabric softener and lies, grieving for her mother and for the innocence she's rapidly losing. Nobody saves her. Not Theodore with his money. Not Grace with her love. Not a system supposedly designed to protect vulnerable children. Amara is property now, and she's beginning to understand what that actually means. Theodore's health collapses on a Wednesday morning while reviewing contracts in his office. The pain hits his chest like a sledgehammer, his vision graying at the edges while his assistant screams for help. The ambulance races him to Charlotte Memorial Hospital, where doctors discover complications from his original injuries, internal bleeding that has been slowly worsening over months. His body needs another transfusion of RH-null blood, and they need it immediately. The medical team scrambles, contacting blood banks nationwide and discovering what they already suspected. Amara Jackson remains the only compatible donor available within the time frame Theodore has left. Dr. Morrison, who performed the original transfusion, faces an ethical nightmare compounded by legal complexity. Amara is in state custody, requiring emergency court approval for any medical procedure. The hospital's legal department files motions, while Theodore's condition deteriorates, minutes bleeding away like the life from his veins. Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to the doctor, convenes an emergency hearing in a conference room converted to makeshift courtroom. Marcus Chen argues Theodore's case with desperate eloquence, explaining the medical necessity and time constraints. Jennifer Hobbs represents Child Protective Services, her position complicated by the unusual circumstances. The Hendersons attend, Sandra wearing an expression of practiced concern, while Bill calculates whether this emergency might increase their monthly stipend. Grace appears with Marcus' legal team. This is the first time she's been allowed in the same room as her daughter in 2 months. Amara sits in a chair designed for adults, her feet dangling above the floor, and when she sees her mother, she breaks. She launches herself across the room, wrapping her arms around Grace's waist and sobbing with abandon. Grace holds her baby, tears streaming down her face, whispering apologies and love into what remains of Amara's butchered hair. The judge watches this reunion, her expression unreadable, while Sandra huffs with obvious disapproval. This is exactly why supervised visitation is necessary. Sandra mutters to Bill, loud enough that everyone hears. The girl is too emotionally attached. The hearing proceeds with clinical efficiency, despite the emotional undercurrents. Medical experts testify about Theodore's condition, the necessity of RH-null blood, the absence of alternatives. The judge reviews Amara's previous donation, noting that she suffered no lasting physical harm. But Judge Morrison is thorough, and she insists on interviewing Amara privately to ensure the child understands and consents. In the judge's temporary chambers, Amara sits across from a woman whose kind eyes remind her painfully of her mother. Judge Morrison speaks gently, explaining the situation in language a 6-year-old can comprehend. Amara, Mr. Whitmore needs your help again, the judge says. But this time, you get to decide. You don't have to donate your blood if you don't want to. Nobody will be angry with you. Do you understand? Amara nods, her voice small. Will Mr. Whitmore die if I say no? Judge Morrison considers lying, offering false comfort, but decides Amara deserves truth. Probably, honey. The doctors can't find any other donor in time. Amara is quiet for a long moment, thinking about Theodore's kindness. The teddy bear he gave her, the way he listened when she talked about books and dreams. She thinks about the Hendersons, about Sandra's scissors and Bill's calculating eyes, and she makes a decision that will change everything. I'll help Mr. Whitmore, Amara says slowly, but only if I can see my mama first. Really see her. Talk to her. They won't let me talk to her. Judge Morrison's expression softens with sympathy. I can arrange that, sweetheart. Anything else? Amara takes a deep breath, gathering courage. And I want to tell Mr. Whitmore something important, something that will help him get better, faster. Can I do that? In private. The judge considers this unusual request, sees something in Amara's eyes that suggests desperation rather than manipulation, and nods. I think we can make that happen. The reunion between Grace and Amara happens in a private hospital room with a social worker observing from a corner. They have 30 minutes, and Grace uses every second to memorize her daughter's face, the changes that have occurred, the sadness that replaced her baby's joy. Amara tells her mother everything in whispered fragments, the abuse and humiliation, the Hendersons' true motivations, the loneliness that feels like drowning. Grace listens with murder in her heart, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughter. I'm going to get you back, Grace promises. Mr. Theodore's lawyers are proving I was framed. You just have to hold on a little longer, baby. Can you do that for me? Amara nods against her mother's chest, absorbing strength from the familiar scent of cocoa butter and determination. When their time expires, Grace kisses her daughter's forehead and watches her walk away, a piece of her soul following the small figure down the corridor. The transfusion proceeds efficiently, Amara's blood flowing into Theodore's veins for the second time. Golden medicine that defies statistical probability. Theodore regains consciousness slowly, his vision focusing on hospital ceiling tiles before finding Amara sitting in a chair beside his bed. She's alone, the medical team having stepped out to give them privacy, as Judge Morrison promised. Mr. Whitmore, Amara says softly, I need to tell you something important. Theodore turns his head, surprised to find them alone. What is it, sweetheart? Amara speaks quickly, urgently, pouring out details about the Hendersons, Victoria's involvement, the planted drugs, everything she's learned and experienced over terrible weeks. Theodore listens with growing horror and rage, his heart monitor beeping faster as his blood pressure rises. Amara concludes with information she overheard from Sandra's phone call last week. A conversation with someone Amara now understands was Victoria. Your daughter is listening through hospital doors, Amara says. She's been watching everything. She wants to make sure my mama never gets me back, so you'll stop helping us. Theodore's mind works rapidly despite his weakened state. He produces his phone from the bedside table, hands shaking slightly, and activates the recording function. Amara, I need you to tell me everything again, he says. Every detail you can remember. Can you do that? Amara repeats her story while the phone captures every word, her young voice steady despite describing events that should have broken her. Theodore records 15 minutes of testimony that will serve as evidence in multiple legal proceedings. When she finishes, Theodore reaches out and takes her small hand in his larger one. You're the bravest person I've ever known, he tells her seriously. And I promise you this. Your mother is getting you back, and Victoria is going to pay for what she's done. I'm going to make sure of it. Amara wants to believe him, but she's learned that promises from adults often mean nothing. Still, there's something in Theodore's eyes, a certainty and strength, that makes her hope feel slightly less foolish. What neither of them knows is that Victoria has indeed been listening, her ear pressed against the hospital room door, and that Amara's revelation has just triggered the most dangerous phase of Victoria's desperation. Victoria drives away from Charlotte Memorial Hospital with hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to leave marks in the leather. Panic, foreign and overwhelming, floods her system as she processes what she overheard through the hospital room door. Her father knows. That wretched child told him everything. And Theodore has always been annoyingly principled when it comes to justice and accountability. Victoria understands with absolute clarity that her inheritance, her future, everything she's built her identity around is about to vanish. She needs a solution, something drastic and final that eliminates the problem before legal proceedings can destroy her. The thought forms with surprising ease, as if some darker part of her personality has been waiting for this exact moment. If Grace and Amara Jackson disappeared, the entire situation resolves itself. No witnesses, no testimony, no obstacles between Victoria and her rightful inheritance. She makes 3 phone calls from her car, each to contacts cultivated over years of existing in Charlotte's shadowy intersections of wealth and criminality. The 3rd call connects her with someone willing to handle her problem for the right price. The arrangement is simple and brutal. A staged home invasion at the safe house where Grace and Amara are staying, pending resolution of the custody case. Nothing traceable to Victoria. Just random violence in a city where such tragedies happen regularly to people without resources or protection. The cost is $50,000, cash, delivered to a location Victoria will never visit again. She authorizes the payment without hesitation because that amount means nothing compared to the $8 billion inheritance at stake. Marcus Chen moved Grace and Amara to a safe house in a quiet suburb after the latest hearing, a modest rental property with security features and distance from the Henderson home. Grace has limited supervised visitation rights now, Judge Morrison having granted additional access based on new evidence suggesting the criminal charges against Grace are fraudulent. Mother and daughter spend their evenings catching up on lost time, Grace helping Amara with homework while trying to repair the psychological damage of foster care. They're beginning to hope, dangerous and fragile, that maybe their nightmare is ending. The attack comes on a Saturday night when darkness provides cover and neighbors are less likely to intervene. Grace is reading to Amara in the living room, a children's book about a brave girl who saves her village, when the sound of breaking glass shatters the moment. Grace reacts with instinct, born from years of living in dangerous neighborhoods. She grabs Amara and runs toward the bedroom, slamming the door and shoving a dresser against it. She can hear footsteps in the house, heavy boots on hardwood floors, voices coordinating the search. Her phone sits on the kitchen counter, useless and unreachable. But Grace remembers something else. A business card Marcus gave her during one of their strategy sessions. Theodore's head of security, a former Secret Service agent named David Chen, Marcus' younger brother. The card remains in Grace's pocket with his direct emergency number. Grace locates her old flip phone, a backup she kept for emergencies, and dials with shaking fingers while holding Amara close. David answers on the 2nd ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. Grace whispers frantically, explaining the situation, the breaking glass and advancing footsteps, the certainty that someone is hunting them. David tells her to stay quiet and hidden, that help is 7 minutes away, that she needs to survive 7 minutes. The bedroom door shudders under heavy impacts as someone kicks it repeatedly. The dresser shifts with each blow, moving incrementally toward failure. Amara buries her face in her mother's chest, silent and terrified in a way that breaks Grace's heart. Grace looks around desperately for weapons, for escape routes, for anything that might save her baby's life. She finds a window, but they're on the 2nd floor. The drop too dangerous with a 6-year-old. The door splinters. Grace makes a decision born of love stronger than self-preservation. When the intruder enters, she shoves Amara into the closet and places herself between her daughter and the threat. The man is large, masked, carrying something heavy in his hand. Grace doesn't hesitate. She launches herself at him, nails raking across exposed skin, fighting with the desperation of a mother defending her child. She doesn't know how to fight properly, but she knows how to survive, and she uses every dirty trick learned from growing up in neighborhoods where violence was common currency. She bites and claws and screams, making as much noise as possible, hoping neighbors will hear and call police. The intruder curses, surprised by her ferocity, and swings whatever he's carrying. It connects with Grace's shoulder and she goes down, pain exploding through her body. The man advances on the closet where Amara hides, and Grace, despite the agony, grabs his ankle and holds on with everything she has. The struggle lasts an eternity compressed into 90 seconds. Then sirens wail in the distance, growing rapidly louder, and the intruder makes a decision. He kicks free of Grace's grip and runs, his partner already fleeing through the shattered front door. David's security team arrives simultaneously with police, the response coordinated and overwhelming. They find Grace bleeding on the bedroom floor with Amara clutching her mother and sobbing. The ambulance takes Grace to the same hospital where Theodore remains. Her left shoulder fractured and her ribs bruised, but nothing life-threatening. Amara refuses to leave her mother's side, and after the trauma she's experienced, nobody has the heart to enforce separation. Theodore visits Grace's room that night, rolling his IV stand beside him because doctors won't discharge him yet. He looks at Grace with profound guilt, knowing his family's dysfunction nearly killed this woman and child. "I'm so sorry," he tells Grace. "This is my fault. Victoria is my responsibility." Grace, exhausted and medicated, shakes her head. "You didn't do this. Evil people did this. Your daughter is sick, Theodore. She needs help you can't provide." The investigation moves quickly once authorities understand the stakes. Financial forensics trace payments from Victoria's accounts to shell companies and known criminals. Security footage from the safe house captures clear images of the intruders. One of them, desperate to avoid lengthy prison time, testifies against the person who hired him. Victoria Whitmore is arrested at her penthouse at dawn, news cameras capturing her perp walk in designer pajamas and handcuffs. The imagery is delicious to a public that loves seeing the privileged held accountable. But Victoria's lawyers are expensive and skilled, and they immediately begin constructing a defense. Temporary insanity brought on by stress and fear of losing her father. A woman driven to desperation by watching gold diggers manipulate a vulnerable elderly man. The narrative is absurd, but they sell it effectively to conservative media outlets eager to frame Victoria as the real victim. Cable news splits along predictable lines, some demanding justice, while others suggest perhaps Victoria had legitimate concerns about protecting her family's wealth. The court of public opinion fractures, but the legal system continues grinding forward. Victoria posts bail, $5 million that barely dents her personal fortune, and immediately launches a media campaign to salvage her reputation. She gives tearful interviews describing her fear and worry for her father. She suggests that Grace and Amara orchestrated the attack themselves for sympathy and financial gain. The accusations are ludicrous, but they find audiences willing to believe them, because believing otherwise requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths about wealth, race, and systemic injustice. Theodore watches his daughter destroy herself on television and feels grief so profound it rivals physical pain. He realizes finally that Victoria is irredeemable, that whatever good existed in her died long ago beneath layers of privilege and entitlement. He makes decisions that will have consequences extending far beyond his remaining lifespan. The trial of Victoria Whitmore becomes the most watched courtroom drama since the O.J. Simpson case. Media trucks, camping outside the Mecklenburg County Courthouse for weeks. Prosecutors charge Victoria with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, witness tampering, evidence tampering, and a dozen other felonies that collectively carry potential sentences exceeding 50 years. Her defense team, led by Martin Rothschild, one of the nation's most expensive attorneys, argues temporary insanity brought on by genuine fear for her father's safety and well-being. The trial exposes years of carefully hidden racism and cruelty, painting a picture of Victoria that shocks even those who thought they understood privilege's darkest manifestations. The prosecution builds its case methodically. Forensic accountants trace money from Victoria's accounts through shell companies to the men who attacked Grace and Amara. Phone records show dozens of calls between Victoria and Caroline Pemberton, Madison's mother, discussing strategies to make Amara's life at Ashford Academy unbearable. Maxwell Crane, the private investigator who planted drugs in Grace's cleaning cart, testifies in exchange for a reduced sentence, describing in clinical detail how Victoria orchestrated Grace's arrest. The courtroom watches security footage of the attack, seeing Grace's desperate fight to protect her daughter, while intruders sought to end their lives. Even some of Victoria's supporters find their certainty wavering. Grace takes the stand on day 7, her left arm still in a sling from injuries sustained during the assault. She recounts her entire nightmare with quiet dignity, describing the prejudice and systemic cruelty that trapped her in poverty despite working 3 jobs. She talks about watching her daughter's spirit break under abuse, disguised as foster care. She speaks about the terror of being framed for crimes she didn't commit, of watching the justice system designed to protect her instead weaponize against her. Defense attorney Rothschild cross-examines aggressively, suggesting Grace orchestrated everything from the beginning, that she deliberately put herself in Theodore's path, that the blood donation was calculated manipulation. Grace listens to these accusations with barely contained fury before responding with devastating simplicity. "My daughter is 6 years old," Grace says, her voice steady. "She donated blood because a person was dying and she could help. That's not manipulation. That's how I raised her. To be kind even when the world is cruel." The courtroom is absolutely silent. On day 9, Amara takes the stand. An unusual decision given her age, but one Judge Morrison allows given the circumstances. Prosecutors have prepared her carefully, explaining courtroom procedures and what to expect. Amara wears a blue dress Grace bought with borrowed money. Her hair braided beautifully because Grace spent 3 hours fixing what Sandra destroyed. She looks impossibly small in the witness chair, her feet dangling above the floor, but her voice remains clear and strong. She recounts the bullying at Ashford Academy, the systematic cruelty that made her believe she deserved suffering. She describes life with the Hendersons, the casual racism and financial exploitation. She explains overhearing the conversation about monthly stipends, understanding she was property rather than a child in need. When asked about the attack, her voice wavers, but doesn't break. "I thought we were going to die," Amara says. "My mama got hurt protecting me. The man wanted to hurt us because we made Miss Victoria's life difficult. But we didn't do anything wrong. We just wanted to be left alone." Rothschild declines to cross-examine, recognizing that attacking a traumatized child on national television would destroy any remaining sympathy for his client. Theodore testifies on day 12, wheeled into the courtroom because his health has deteriorated significantly. He looks a decade older than his 65 years, cancer eating away at his strength with visible efficiency. But his mind remains sharp, and his testimony devastates Victoria's defense. He presents recordings of Amara's hospital room confession, documenting Victoria's involvement in the frame job and ongoing harassment. He provides emails and text messages showing Victoria's racist attitudes dating back years, evidence his own investigators compiled. He recounts Victoria's threats to destroy Grace if he didn't abandon his relationship with the Jackson family. "My daughter believes wealth and whiteness excuse any behavior," Theodore says, his voice heavy with grief. "She thinks other people exist only as obstacles or resources. I failed her as a father, failed to teach her basic human decency, but I won't let her destroy 2 innocent people to protect an inheritance she's done nothing to earn." The defense presents character witnesses praising Victoria's charitable work and business acumen. They argue she suffered a psychological break, that the stress of her father's near-death experience triggered temporary insanity. Psychiatrists testify about her fragile mental state, suggesting she wasn't fully responsible for her actions. The prosecution counters with Victoria's long history of racist incidents covered up with money, settlements paid to former employees who experienced discrimination, allegations of bias in hiring and promotion decisions at Whitmore Industries. They paint a picture of calculated cruelty rather than temporary insanity. The jury deliberates for 6 days, the nation watching with bated breath. Some predict acquittal or a hung jury because Victoria's wealth and whiteness historically shield people from consequences. Others hope for justice, though justice feels like a fragile concept in a system that has failed Grace and Amara repeatedly. The jury returns with a verdict that surprises legal analysts. Guilty on conspiracy charges but deadlocked on attempted murder, unable to reach unanimous agreement on whether Victoria actually intended to kill Grace and Amara or merely intimidate them. Judge Morrison declares a mistrial on that count, frustrating prosecutors but still leaving Victoria facing substantial prison time. But before sentencing occurs, the prosecution reveals a final piece of evidence that changes everything. A forensic accountant discovers Victoria has been embezzling from Whitmore Industries for 7 years, siphoning funds through fake vendors and inflated contracts to maintain her lavish lifestyle. The amounts are staggering, exceeding $20 million. Theodore had no knowledge of this theft. But once revealed, he presses criminal charges personally. The financial crimes carry mandatory minimum sentences under federal law, and unlike the attempted murder charge, they're supported by undeniable documentary evidence. Victoria's defense collapses completely. Rothschild negotiates a plea deal to avoid additional trials. Victoria pleads guilty to conspiracy, witness tampering, evidence tampering, and embezzlement charges. In exchange, prosecutors recommend concurrent sentencing that effectively caps her time at 15 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 10. Judge Morrison accepts the plea but adds a scathing statement about privilege, racism, and the abuse of power before announcing sentence. "You had every advantage life could provide," Judge Morrison tells Victoria. "Wealth, education, opportunity. And you used those advantages to torment and nearly kill a woman and child whose only crime was being kind to your father. You represent the worst of what privilege produces." 15 years in federal custody. Victoria is led away in handcuffs, her designer clothes and careful makeup unable to disguise the reality of her situation. The courtroom erupts in applause until Judge Morrison's gavel restores order. Outside, Grace and Amara face a wall of cameras and microphones. Grace speaks briefly, thanking Theodore's legal team and expressing hope that justice will deter others from similar cruelty. But mostly, she just wants to take her daughter home, to begin rebuilding a life that's been shattered and scattered like glass. Theodore watches the news coverage from his hospital bed, feeling vindication mixed with profound sadness. His daughter is going to prison. His family name is destroyed. His health is failing rapidly. But somehow, witnessing Victoria's accountability brings peace he hasn't felt in years. Theodore Whitmore dies on a Tuesday morning in early spring, surrounded by cherry blossoms visible through his hospital room window, and holding Amara's small hand in his own. His cancer spread aggressively following the trial's stress, metastasizing to his liver and lungs with cruel efficiency. He spent his final 6 weeks ensuring his affairs were perfectly ordered, working with Marcus Chen to structure a legacy that will outlive his physical presence. Grace and Amara visited daily, reading to him and keeping him company through pain medication, haze, and lucid moments of profound connection. Theodore taught Amara about business and responsibility during those final weeks, explaining Whitmore Industries' operations in language a 6-year-old could understand. He talked about using wealth to create positive change rather than accumulate power. He described his vision for a company that treats all employees with dignity, regardless of race or class. Amara absorbed these lessons with the seriousness of someone far older than her years, trauma having forced a maturity that childhood should never require. The funeral occurs on a gray Saturday with rain threatening but never quite arriving. Thousands attend. Business leaders and politicians mixing with Whitmore Industries employees and community members whose lives Theodore touched through decades of quiet philanthropy. Grace and Amara sit in the front row, their presence controversial to some, but undeniable given Theodore's explicit instructions. The eulogies paint Theodore as a complicated man who evolved late in life, whose greatest transformation came through connection with a child who expected nothing from him except basic human kindness. The will reading happens 1 week later in Marcus Chen's conference room. Attendees limited to immediate stakeholders. Victoria participates via video link from federal prison. Her orange jumpsuit, a stark contrast to the professional attire of everyone else present. Her expression cycles between defiance and resignation, but mostly she looks exhausted, as if maintaining hatred requires more energy than she possesses. Marcus distributes the documents with characteristic efficiency. Theodore's final wishes spelled out in legal language, and supplemented by a video message recorded during his final coherent week. Everyone expects a traditional distribution. Victoria receiving the bulk of the estate despite her incarceration, with perhaps a trust fund or scholarship established in Amara's name. The reality shocks everyone. Theodore's video message plays on a large screen, his voice weak but determined. "I've spent months considering how to distribute my wealth in ways that honor the values I claim to hold, but often failed to practice," Theodore says from his hospital bed. Victoria will receive $1 million, enough to rebuild her life when she's released from prison, but not enough to insulate her from consequence. The remainder of my personal fortune, and 51% controlling interest in Whitmore Industries, goes to Amara Jackson, to be held in trust until her 25th birthday with Grace Jackson as trustee and Marcus Chen as co-trustee to provide institutional continuity. The conference room erupts in chaos, lawyers and board members shouting questions while Victoria screams through the video link. Marcus waits for silence before continuing. Grace sits frozen, unable to process the magnitude of what she's hearing. $8 billion. Control of a company employing 15,000 people. Responsibility that should rest on experienced shoulders, not those of a single mother who cleans hospital floors and her 6-year-old daughter. Theodore's video message continues after the initial shock subsides. Grace, I know this terrifies you, Theodore says, seeming to anticipate her exact reaction. You're wondering how someone with your background could possibly manage this responsibility. But Amara didn't save my life with her credentials or her experience. She saved me with her character. That's what this inheritance represents. A vote of confidence in your family's values over traditional qualifications. The will includes provisions for education, mentorship, and support systems. You won't navigate this alone. The video shifts focus. Amara, you're probably still too young to understand what this means. By the time you watch this as an adult, it'll be long gone. But I want you to know that you didn't just save my life with your blood. You saved my soul by showing me what unconditional compassion looks like across every divide that separates people. Use this wealth to build a world where children like you don't have to be extraordinary to receive basic dignity. That's my final wish. The legal documents outline specific requirements. Grace must accept a seat on Whitmore Industries' board of directors immediately, receiving full voting rights and fiduciary responsibility. The company must implement comprehensive diversity and equity reforms within 2 years, with specific targets for minority hiring, pay equity, and supplier diversity. Failure to meet these requirements triggers alternative distribution of assets to charitable organizations focused on racial justice. Marcus explains additional provisions designed to protect Amara's inheritance from exploitation or mismanagement. Independent auditors will review all trust expenditures. Grace receives a generous salary for her trustee responsibilities, but cannot access the principal. Educational expenses for Amara face no limits. But luxury purchases require co-trustee approval until Amara reaches 18. Victoria's lawyer immediately challenges the will, arguing that Theodore lacked capacity due to medication and that he was unduly influenced by Grace. But Theodore anticipated this attack, arranging for multiple physicians to evaluate his mental state while drafting the will. Video testimony from 3 independent psychiatrists confirms Theodore's complete lucidity and understanding of his decisions. The challenge fails within weeks, courts recognizing the will's validity. Life transforms overnight for Grace and Amara in ways both wonderful and terrifying. They move from their cramped apartment to a modest home in a safe neighborhood. Not the mansion Theodore owned, but comfortable and secure with a backyard where Amara can play. Grace resigns from her cleaning jobs, her trustee salary exceeding what she earned, working 3 positions combined. She enrolls in business courses at a local community college, determined to earn the responsibility Theodore placed in her hands. Amara returns to school, but a different one, a progressive private academy focused on social justice education, where her background is celebrated rather than stigmatized. She thrives academically and emotionally, therapy helping her process trauma, while supportive teachers nurture her natural intelligence. The other children know about her inheritance, but they've been raised in an environment that values character over wealth, and Amara is judged by her kindness rather than her bank account. Grace's first board meeting at Whitmore Industries occurs 3 months after Theodore's death, and she walks into the conference room feeling like an imposter. 20 executives in expensive suits regard her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed contempt. A black woman with a high school education has no business dictating policy to people with Harvard MBAs. But Grace has learned something through her nightmare journey. Credentials matter less than character, and she possesses moral clarity these men have never developed. She listens carefully to presentations about quarterly earnings and market expansion, absorbing information and asking questions that initially seem naive, but increasingly reveal a sharp mind grasping complex concepts. When discussion turns to planned layoffs at a North Carolina manufacturing plant, Grace objects, pointing out that the factory employs primarily Black and Latino workers in an economically depressed area. "Find another way to cut costs," she says firmly. "We're not destroying a community to improve our profit margin by half a percentage point." The room erupts in objections about fiduciary responsibility and shareholder value. Grace lets them finish before responding with devastating simplicity. "I control 51% of this company. Theodore left it to me specifically to change how business operates. We can be profitable and ethical. If you can't figure out how to do that, maybe you're in the wrong jobs." The executives learn quickly that Grace's apparent softness conceals steel forged in poverty and struggle. Over the following year, Whitmore Industries transforms into a model of corporate social responsibility. Minimum wage for all employees increases to $18 per hour. The company establishes scholarship programs for employees, children, and partnerships with historically Black colleges. Supply chain audits ensure minority-owned businesses receive fair opportunities. Some executives resign in protest, but others embrace the changes, discovering that purpose can be as satisfying as profit. The company's reputation improves, attracting conscious consumers and investors who care about environmental and social governance. Financial performance remains strong, proving that ethics and profitability aren't mutually exclusive. 5 years after Theodore's death, Amara turns 11 and visits his grave with her mother on a Saturday morning. Spring flowers bloom across the cemetery, life persisting despite death's presence. Amara places fresh roses on the granite marker, her ritual every month without fail. "I got an A on my science project, Mr. Whitmore," Amara says softly, talking to the headstone as if Theodore can hear. "And Mama got promoted to vice chair of the board." People listen to her now. They respect her. Grace stands behind her daughter, one hand on Amara's shoulder, marveling at the strange path that brought them here. She thinks about the hospital corridor 5 years ago, about a desperate decision to let her baby donate blood to a dying stranger. She thinks about everything that followed, the abuse and terror and injustice, and about the unexpected redemption that emerged from tragedy. "We're making you proud, Theodore," Grace whispers. "Every day, we're trying to build the world you imagined." Amara turns to her mother with a smile that finally reaches her eyes again, the trauma healing slowly but steadily. "Can we visit the factory in Durham next week?" Amara asks. "I want to see the new childcare center we funded, and maybe talk to some of the workers about what else they need." Grace nods, pride swelling in her chest. Her daughter is learning to use wealth as a tool for justice rather than a shield from consequence. Amara understands that money creates responsibility, not just privilege, and that power exists to lift others rather than maintain hierarchies. They walk back to their car, a modest sedan that Grace insists on driving, despite having access to luxury vehicles. Grace believes in staying grounded, in remembering where they came from and how easily circumstances can change. The inheritance will last generations if managed wisely, and Grace is determined to ensure it creates opportunity rather than entitlement. That evening, Grace and Amara cook dinner together in their kitchen, a simple meal of baked chicken and roasted vegetables. They talk about school and work, about upcoming board meetings and science fair projects. Their conversation is ordinary and precious. Two people who survived trauma and found their way back to normalcy. After dinner, they curl up on the couch to watch a movie, Amara's head resting against her mother's shoulder. Grace kisses her daughter's forehead, breathing in the cocoa butter scent of her hair, and feels gratitude so profound it borders on pain. They could have died. Victoria's cruelty could have destroyed them. The system could have separated them permanently. But somehow, impossibly, they survived and emerged stronger. Amara drifts toward sleep, secure in her mother's arms, dreaming of a future where kindness matters more than color, and where justice isn't an aspiration but a reality. Grace watches her daughter's peaceful face and makes a silent promise to Theodore's memory and to every child who deserves better than the world currently offers. She will use this unexpected fortune to dismantle barriers and create opportunities. She will teach Amara to lead with compassion while maintaining strength. She will prove that ordinary people with extraordinary values can transform systems designed to exclude them. The story of a 6-year-old black girl who saved a white billionaire's life doesn't end with inheritance or revenge or even justice. It ends with hope, fragile and fierce, that humanity's better angels can prevail over prejudice and hate. It ends with a mother and daughter building a legacy that honors the man who recognized their worth when the world refused. And it ends with a question that echoes through time. What kind of world do we want to create for children brave enough to save lives, without expecting anything in return? Grace and Amara are answering that question every day, one decision at a time, transforming pain into purpose and tragedy into triumph. The journey continues, but for tonight, they rest in the safety of their home, surrounded by love that no amount of money could buy, but that makes wealth meaningful. This is their story, imperfect and ongoing, a testament to resilience and the revolutionary power of radical kindness. What do you think? If you were in Amara's position, would you have donated blood to save a stranger, even knowing the complications that might follow? What responsibilities do the wealthy have toward communities they impact? How can we as individuals challenge systemic racism and economic injustice in our daily lives? Share your thoughts in the comments below because these conversations matter and your voice matters. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it with others who need to hear about courage, compassion, and the possibility of justice. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances and redemption, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge us to become better versions of ourselves. Because change begins with awareness, and awareness begins with stories that refuse to let us look away. Thank you for spending this time with Grace and Amara's journey. May we all find the courage to act with kindness when it matters most, to stand up against injustice even when it's difficult, and to remember that our shared humanity matters more than the barriers that divide us. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.